My name is Michael, and I'm going to do my crazy theory at the beginning instead of the end, because I just can't get it out of my mind. I think I finally have a firm theory about what is going on the testing floor and the whole project of Severance that Lumon is working on, and it's military severance. There have been a lot of allusions to things in each episode, and a lot of people have picked up on the talk about babies and fatherhood, but I think something that's a little bit more subtle and in the background is references to war and soldiers. In fact, one of the earliest things we see in episode 1 is that creepy painting with Kier wearing a Union Army uniform called Kier Pardons His Betrayers, and we see soldiers in the background. In episode 7, Ragabi refers to Harmony Cobell as a soldier for Lumon. So I think there are odd little hints that keep popping up. And in the previous episode, Bert and Fields referred to each other as Attila and talked about a terrible sin that could never really be washed away. And Attila the Hun was, of course, a brutal conqueror that tried to destroy the Roman Empire. So I'm beginning to think that there are more than a few hints leading us to think that Lumon is trying to create a severed soldier, because they were showing us in this episode all of the things that you don't want to do. You don't want to go to the dentist, you don't want to go on a plane ride, you don't want to exercise or something like that. But what's the thing that you would most not want to do? I don't think Cold Harbor is death per se. I think it is ego death, what they also mentioned in there. They're going to find a way to balance the human mind in such a way, using Severance, that not only are you not your experiential self as you go in, but you also have no severe emotional responses against anything. So you're the perfect Myrmidon who can be commanded to do whatever they want. Maybe this is like a last-ditch effort that Lumon is engaging in if the subtle approach towards expanding Severance doesn't work, or if the Severance process gets banned. They can unleash this as like a last resort and stage some sort of violent coup against the government and make it into a Luminist nation, or maybe they can do that to multiple governments simultaneously around the world. There's really no limit to what they can do if they can create the perfect soldier. Or maybe Lumon is actually working and getting funded by the US military to create some sort of emotionless soldier. You know, a big problem since the end of the Vietnam War in the United States is that we don't have conscription anymore because we got rid of it because it was so unpopular and caused so much distress. But if people are severed, you can't really do anything about it. They can just turn on the soldier component in your brain, and then they can do whatever they feel like. Let me know if this is absolutely crazy, or what you think that it could have a military purpose and not just like a commercial use for getting people to avoid going to the dentist or something like that. Because as I was watching this, I was noticing what they were showing us, but I was also thinking 2 or 3 steps ahead about where Lumon might be headed with this creepy process. So this episode takes a serious emotional toll because it is all about Mark and Gemma. We finally get to see what the testing floor is like, or at least this piece of it. I have a theory that maybe it's bigger than what we're shown. And Gemma is still down there, and I really do mean Gemma, not Miss Casey or some other weird severed person. There is the actual real-world Gemma down there on the testing floor. She still has all of her memories, and she still remembers Mark. So that at least is solved, but this episode created way more questions than answers, as a good mystery show usually does. The Gemma that Mark knew is in hell. I know it's not the literal fire and pitchforks and brimstone kind of hell, but it is basically hell. She's trapped in absolute isolation, going through horrible tests that she doesn't remember but can still feel the reverberations and pain from. And I'm beginning to wonder, back in season 1, I actually had a little bit of hope for Harmony Cobell actually trying to do something good or right with Gemma by trying to make it seem like she was pushing the two of them back together in the hopes that they will notice one another, even though they're both currently severed. But I'm beginning to think that it was just an insidious test that was done in order to ensure absolutely that there can be no connection whatsoever that supersedes Severance. which I think is also part of why the tests are being done. She's going through all these horrible experiences to see if the severance process will last even through trauma. A major unanswered question, and let me know if you have answered this and there's something I missed, but we still don't know the specific circumstances of Gemma going down into the testing floor. Did she really have an accident and she was taken in an injured or comatose state down into the bowels here without her knowledge? Or did they tell her that the only way that they could save her life was to take her down to this weird testing floor? Did she volunteer for this practice? That would be the creepiest thing imaginable, because she would presumably have known that Mark would think she's dead, or maybe they claim that they would tell Mark that she wasn't dead and she doesn't know that to the outside world she is deceased, although I kind of got the impression that she probably did. Something truly horrifying that I was thinking about was maybe Gemma's accident wasn't an accident and she actually attempted on that night to end her own life. And when she was discovered somehow, maybe by Lumon EMTs or something, and taken to a Lumon medical center, they explained to her that they could find a way for her to balance her woe or dread and remove that self-destructive depression from her life that has been caused by her struggles over the past few years. And she willingly agreed to do it in the hopes that this would somehow make her mentally well. I'm noticing, maybe it's just because I'm obsessed with Twin Peaks and it's my favorite show, but I noticed more than a few similarities, some curious linkages.
Gordon, there's some curious linkages here
Between Severance and Twin Peaks. Notably in Twin Peaks, and spoiler for Twin Peaks, so, just in case you haven't watched it, but in Twin Peaks, the character of Laura Palmer dies, and we find out that in some ways Laura knew that she was putting herself in extremely dangerous situations and allowed herself to be killed in the hopes of purifying her spirit and not being corrupted by evil. So maybe there's something similar there, where we've been thinking for a long, long time that Gemma, we thought she was dead, but then it turns out she's not. Again, like Laura Palmer. Sort of like Laura Palmer in season 3. But she wasn't actually kidnapped by Lumon. She agreed to go through this process of destroying herself. I was very surprised to find out that Gemma was alone on the testing floor. I kind of imagined that it would be like an entire community of people. Like in the first scene where Gemma is walking onto the college campus, I actually I pointed at the screen like that Leonardo DiCaprio meme, and I was like, oh, that's the place where people live. It's like an entire underground village inside the Lumon building or something. But of course that wasn't it. But I'm still extremely suspicious that there must be other people being tested on the testing floor, because we saw the names of all of the doors that Gemma was going in for tests, and a bunch of them were not the same as season 1 files that MDR was working on. So I'm thinking that they're working on a whole bunch of people to do various things. But let me know if you think that there is an entire, maybe not community, but a few dozen testing subjects on the floor that we just never see. The tests that Gemma is enduring are hell. I mean, it's, I've seen some worse depictions of hell, like in Dante's Inferno, but this is pretty close to being a real-life underworld where you are continually tortured forever.
Nothing says Christmas like grouting.
Especially the dental work one. I hate going to the dentist like many people, and if Severance was a thing, I don't know, I might consider doing it for going to get like a root canal done or something. And speaking of which, I don't know if they explain this, so let me know if they do, but I don't think Dr. Maurer is a dentist. He's, don't we see him working as a doctor in a fertility clinic? So it's not even just like dental work being done, it's being done by someone who I don't even know if they have dental training, which might be even more torturous and horrible. Based on what Maurer says, presumably each of the rooms somehow corresponds to one of the 4 tempers, but there's more than 4 rooms, so there must be other stuff going on. I'm not sure. I mean, I think that there was like an exercise room, which was really creepy, and some other people had, took that to a place that I did not want to go, but now I can't unsee it, that maybe there's some sort of violation going on of Gemma by Dr. Maurer, would make this even more like hell. When she was dressing up in these little outfits. I'm not exactly sure why they did that with the outfits. Was it just to like sell the scene to her innie or something? Or I guess it's not an innie exactly, but her severed personality. And that's something else we found out. Apparently, you can be severed multiple times, and that's been theorized about for a long time now, since season 1, that you can have multiple different Severance personalities, which is even more disturbing. Honestly, now that I think about it, the Christmas one might be worse. It might be the lowest layer of hell.
Sorry there wasn't any eggnog. Might be out of season.
I only realized this while editing, but the eggnog. I completely forgot about that from the last episode, where Mark specifically mentions not being able to find eggnog to Ragabi. Why the heck was he supposed to be drinking eggnog? Does Ragabi know about the Christmas room? Because if she saw someone that she would identify as Gemma, she could have seen Miss Casey, but she could have been down on the testing floor as well, and maybe seen the Christmas room? Is that what she was trying to do by having him drink eggnog? Remind him or get on the same wavelength or something as Christmas time with Gemma? In fact, now that I think about it, were they saying in this episode that she died around Christmas time? Possibly? I'm gonna have to go back and check that again, but what's with the eggnog? If you told me that it had to be Christmas morning and I was writing thank you notes for hours and hours for my entire existence, I might prefer to be dental tortured for eternity instead. That just sounds like an absolute nightmare to me. If Miss Casey learns somehow to tame her tempers like Kier Egan wanted, then would she become a robot? Would she be absolutely emotionless? Would she still be able to experience cognition? I mean, we already kind of have in the regular severed employees people that mostly are docile and obedient. So I'm not sure how much more obedient they could be, but I don't know. As if this wasn't enough, we learn even more disturbing things about the testing floor. Because down there's apparently 4 like doppelganger versions of the MDR team sitting down there, and they're involved in some way in the refining process, but we still don't know enough about it to really know for certain what's going on. Something I've always wondered about MDR is when they put numbers into one of the boxes and the box is rejected or accepted, how do the boxes or the program or these doppelgangers on the testing floor know that the numbers are right or wrong? Because it would seem that if the computer knew whether they're right or wrong, couldn't the computer just do it itself? Why do they need the MDR team to put the numbers in? Cold Harbor might be based on the Battle of Cold Harbor, which, even though it was fought towards the end of the war, was apparently a Confederate victory, and a pretty stunning one at that, where Union soldiers were mown down in large numbers because of incompetent commanding. So that's another like military-ish kind of reason I'm thinking that they could be making severed soldiers. I'm also trying to think about how that relates to what Kier Egan said. There's a quote from one of his books where he said he was working as a doctor or a medic during the Civil War, and he looked inside men and saw the war. I dug inside of soldiers and within found the war. I had to look up the exact quote. And I was thinking, does that mean that he was talking about a symbolic war within? The ideographic cards that O&D were printing, we found out was something that Gemma was working on in her regular life.
Chikai Bardo. I don't know, it looks like 2 guys fighting.
No, it's the same guy fighting himself, defeating his own psyche. Ego death.
How do you know it's the same guy?
And the hair's the same.
This show may be causing me to lose my mind because I only just now noticed that she said they're the same person because their hair is the same. Is that why her hair is different in all of the rooms? And we all kind of thought that they were like self-defense cards, related to violence or possibly war. But Gemma says that they're actually related to a philosophical war, an inner war rather than an outer conflict about defeating the ego and your sense of individuality and subjective self. So when Keir Egan dug inside people and found the war, maybe he's talking about another sort of the taming of the tempers rather than a real military conflict. So that could in some ways support the military severance theory, and in some ways it kind of rejects it because it's more about the war within the mind rather than the war without. Winston Churchill did say in the 1950s that in the future, empires will be empires of the mind rather than physical empires. We also find out why the O&D people are so creeped out by the doctor bringing the dental equipment, because Dr. Maurer is thus far the creepiest, nastiest person on this show. And that is saying something, because we have seen some depraved people on this show already.
I love you. Oop. I said, I love you.
I love you too.
But Dr. Maurer is just a step above. I like how they're escalating the scales of malevolence with each season and just showing us worse and worse examples of Lumon. It was so hard to watch Gemma be tortured. Well, I mean, I say Gemma, but they're severing her for each room. It's not just one severed person experiencing all of these things, which would be bad enough, but it would kind of be some variety. Like, you could be at the dentist and then you could at least be exercising and then maybe go do something else. It would be a little bit better, but the entirety of her, that severed versions of her existence, she has an entire identity and personality that is just Christmas, another one that is just the dentist. I realized while editing, I don't know if they explain how Lumon knows what Gemma's fears are. Like, we as the audience know because Mark knew that she hated writing thank you notes, but how does Lumon know that? Did Gemma write down a list of all of the things that she hates doing or all of her fears and give it to Lumon inadvertently, like when she was sending in that test thing? Is that what the refining is? That Mark is determining what deep down are the things that provoke malice, dread, woe, etc. in the subject? Or maybe they just asked her in a more innocent time, or maybe Lumon is listening, they somehow found out about it through spying on them. I'm not sure if they explain that. And it's a harrowing experience to see her go through this. And it's amazing. She is one of the strongest, probably the strongest character we've yet seen on the show. Because the fact that she is able to endure this and still remain mentally competent after years of isolation and suffering is just a testament to the strength of her soul. Somewhat lighter note is that we do get the predicted flashback from Mark and maybe Gemma. It almost seems like they're both simultaneously flashing back to when they were together. I almost kind of felt like it was like, again, in Twin Peaks, like when Hawk says that people have multiple souls.
More than one? Blackfoot legend. Waking souls that give life to the mind and the body. A dream soul that wanders. Where do they wander? Faraway places. The land of the dead.
And maybe that's what the Chikai Bardo thing is, which is a reference to a very complicated and confusing aspect of Tibetan Buddhist philosophy that I tried to grasp, but even the Cliff Notes version that I was able to find was kind of like, it was...
You're forgetting the first two noble truths of the Buddha.
I am not.
Yes, you are. 1, existence is suffering. 2, the cause of suffering is desire.
The Innies admittedly do live a samsara-like existence where there is nothing but a wheel of suffering perpetually until death. Maybe Lumon is trying to quote-unquote liberate them of their desire to be free in order to make them more perfect workers.
By way of explaining what we're about to do, I am first going to tell you a little bit about the country called Tibet.
But collating it as best I can, the Chikai Bardo is a sort of halfway point between your physical life and your death. And within the Chikai Bardo, where you're sort of like, you still vaguely look human because you haven't decomposed yet. I think it may be possible through Tibetan Buddhist tantric meditation to learn how to break out of the cycle of suffering and samsara and either be reincarnated as something better or to attain a kind of Buddhahood status and remove yourself from the wheel of suffering that everyone else is involved in. And which also kind of makes me think that Gemma is kind of maybe wanted to do this to intentionally tame her tempers, but she had a very different interpretation about what Lumon was selling to her. It was very sweet and adorable to see the romance between Mark and Gemma from the first time they met to living together towards marital struggles and everything like that. They have like a little meet cute at this very sinister Lumon-sponsored blood drive. Lumon must be gathering the blood and performing tests on it to try to find suitable subjects. But there were some absolutely heartbreaking scenes of Mark and Gemma in love, and they just absolutely adored each other for most of their relationship. And the only time that it ended up hitting a snag is when Mark and Gemma try to have a child, and unfortunately, Gemma miscarries. And I was aware of things like postpartum depression and psychosis, but I also went to look up post-miscarriage mental health issues. And it seems like there are indeed terrible struggles that people go through after miscarrying, of depression and possibly psychosis and all sorts of horrible problems and mental health concerns, which makes me much more weirdly suspicious that Gemma may have intentionally signed up for this process of spending time on the testing floor, that she was exploited because she was in an incredibly vulnerable state. And some people were suggesting that Lumon manufactured the miscarriage. I don't know how they could have done that, unless there are abortifacients in the water or something like that, which I wouldn't put past Lumon for doing. I mean, I think a lot of people I saw were reacting to Mark as kind of being an asshole or a jerk to Gemma, and that may have caused some friction. But I was kind of sympathetic with Mark because I was worried, and I think that his saying, you shouldn't waste your time doing this, and why are you talking about ego death? You know, he says it's weird, and it is weird. And I think he was thinking what I was thinking, which is that, is my wife mentally well right now? Because she's been going through all this strain and trauma. Could she be having some sort of mental breakdown? And that's why she's obsessed with ego death and suddenly talking about that at breakfast, as you do.
Yes, one asks at breakfast.
They were just, they weren't just having some coffee and chatting about the day. They were talking about ego death and Tibetan Buddhism. Oh, we also find out that Mark Scout is apparently a finesse lord, because he is just absolutely slaying it in this episode. And the way that women reacted to it, especially on TikTok, was the thirstiest I've seen in quite a long time.
What if it doesn't work?
Turn around and bend over.
I don't think any of this would have been nearly as successful if we didn't have an excellent director, Jessica Lee Garnier. And this is apparently her first time directing, and she also did the cinematography for this. And it works beautifully. There's a lot of movement with the camera. There's a scene where there are odd little flickers, like frames are being removed from the scene as they're moving down a hallway. And it kind of reminded me of, it's like a symbolic severance. You have memory, but there are parts of it that are removed and taken out by the severance process. And there are some extreme close-ups, and there's a music scene where Mark and Gemma are in love and dancing to this French song. It's just such a beautifully shot experience, and I think it was made so much more powerful by the directing here. It was fantastic. I still think that episode 4 is my favorite so far this season, but 7 is a very close second. I only noticed this when editing, but in one of these blink and you'll miss it freeze frame moments, there were 2 mysterious images that I found on screen after the Christmas sequence. I thought at first they may have been images from somewhere else in the episode, but I don't know if I recognize them. They're so faint and vague, I can't quite make them out. Let me know if anybody has any idea what these things mean, or if they're hinting at something that's going to happen, because it's just really weird that unless you're able to pause this and play it back frame by frame, you're not going to see it. Gemma is also an absolute trooper because she managed to use violence to try to break out of the testing floor.
The death of Ivan Ilyich. Let me guess. He dies at the end.
And I know that everyone cheered, as I did, when she whacked Dr. Mauer on the head. And I hope that he's like concussed or even dead. That would probably be for the best, because he is intensely creepy. But her escape is impossible, because once she leaves the testing floor, the only way out is through the severed floor, where she turns into Miss Casey. So she's trapped there forever. I don't know what would happen if they managed to bring her out from the severed floor as Miss Casey into the regular world. Would she stay as Miss Casey and she's only allowed to be Gemma on the testing floor? Or would she turn back into Gemma and not even act like she's severed? Because we know that they could turn on or off the severance process even outside of Lumon, so we can only hope that somehow Gemma can be restored to life outside of the testing floor. But I have a weird feeling that Lumon has made it so she can't ever be Gemma outside of the testing floor. And even if they got her outside, she would just be Miss Casey or something. So I dearly hope that's not the case, but I have a weird suspicion that that could be what's going on. Probably the most shocking severance theory that I've heard recently is people questioning Devin being a good or bad person. And this really stunned me, like eyes wide, like, no, that could not possibly be the case. There are arguments in favor of it, but the idea that Devin might be a bad person is so extreme and so out of left field, especially when the creators like to drop breadcrumbs for you to find later on, and I don't really see there being many with Devin. I can only hope that she is a good person. But yeah, the main thing is that she wanted to call Harmony Cobell, which is very, very strange, and Ragabi was right to be suspicious of that and flee immediately, because she would have been either arrested by the police or taken to jail, or taken, not to jail, but to like a dungeon at Lumon, where they're either going to kill her or start testing on her or something like that. So she was very right to be suspicious, and it just seemed like such a wild idea to call her, because maybe she's willing to turn against Lumon, but it just seems so unlikely that I was a little bit weirded out that Devin was so quick to do that, and even still had her phone number in her phone, which was odd. Also, her phone, as some people pointed out, was an Android phone, and Apple TV doesn't like villains using iPhones, which was such a weird thing to catch. That, I mean, these people, my goodness, that is really good that the people caught that. Another thing that I only noticed on repeat viewing, because it was just sort of like, it was deliberately left in the background, a background conversation that Rickon, mustachioed Rickon, by the way, was having with Mark, where Rickon mentioned that there was a technique to transform urine into drinkable water. Again, another water reference, but it also made me think that it could be a vague elliptical allusion to alchemy, where you could turn lead or even excrement into gold somehow. And they want to try to turn a base element like Lumon, a religious organization, perceives the sinful world to be, and transform it through their techniques into something good and pure, like water, which is clear and has nothing clouding it. It is just absolute pure, which might be why they like water so much. It's just, it represents not giving in to the base, evil, primitive tempers. Gemma is a Russian literature professor, and they mention two books, both by Leo Tolstoy, The Death of Ivan Ilyich and Haji Murad. And this book was another reason where I began to kind of think about the soldier thing, because it is a war story about a tribesman from the Caucasus who betrays his own people to side with the conquering Russians, and is very conflicted about what he's doing, and is eventually cut to pieces at the very end trying to save his family. And he doesn't know how, he feels divided in his loyalties forever, which maybe is them trying to say that Someone who is tempered is not going to have these divided loyalties and is going to just not really feel anything for anyone, and thus somehow escape this horrible death. But the other book, The Death of Ivan Ilyich, which I also haven't read, is partially about the authentic and inauthentic life that you can live, and how if you fear death, then you are not going to be able to live an authentic, true life, and are just going to live a shallow, superficial life trying to strive for money and power, and not actually really live. And only when you forget your fear of death are you going to be allowed to live to be your true self. And that does kind of lean towards the theory that Cold Harbor is about removing the fear of death somehow, but rather than war specifically, but I'm still not entirely certain about what's going on. It does strongly hint that Gemma is going to die in both of these stories. The hero, because this is Russian literature, both of the heroes die tragically at the end, so maybe that's what Gemma is sort of destined for, but I certainly hope not. I hope she survives somehow. But yeah, this episode was an emotional roller coaster. As usual, there are a bunch of things that I just couldn't get to in a reasonably length video. Like the fact that, what is Gemma eating? I couldn't find an answer to this on Reddit, so let me know if you know, but she's eating dehydrated food, and it's so creepy and disgusting that she would do that, but then it almost looks like little cakes she's eating, even though they have like meat and potatoes and stuff, and she places little like flowers on them. Very eerie. Why is she supposed to be doing calisthenics and reading 50 pages at least per day before doing her work? Who exactly are the doppelgangers, and why are they there? Is it just like a rhyming pun visually to have these people be doppelgangers of the innies, or is there some sort of meaning for that? But yeah, the story took us on the highest of highs, with Mark and Gemma being in love, towards their relationship being on the rocks and fighting and arguing all the time because of her fertility struggles, to the absolute depths of despair where Gemma is down in, the literal hell on earth that Lumon has created. Something that I felt watching the first season about Mark seems to be happening to Gemma, because they felt that they were symbolically in hell, so they decided to get severed. But instead of removing them from that symbolic hell, it placed part of them literally in a real hell. It's no longer a symbol. They actually went down to hell. And maybe they felt that it was okay that this was going to happen because of an intense self-hatred that is really something that should be dealt with depression. Oh, I almost forgot. I mentioned this, I think, in a couple of videos before, that they're referencing Scientology. They make the most direct reference possible to Scientology in this one, where they have Gemma holding like a bootleg Temu version of an e-meter, and they're measuring her responses to various eerie questions about death. So, yeah, as usual, let me know what you thought about this episode, what you thought about the military severance theory, why you think Gemma is down there. Do you think she's going to survive the season? Do you think that she will continue to exist as Gemma if she leaves the Lumon building entirely? Or can they transform her back into any one of her innies at any point if she manages to escape? And escape is essentially fruitless now that she has the chip in her head. And, yeah, this is a wild episode, beautifully shot, wonderfully acted, a lot of answers, even more questions, so much creepiness. It usually is better when you're imagining how horrible and creepy something is compared to when you actually see it. But I think they did a great job fulfilling and even exceeding our expectations about how horrifying and just hellish the testing floor is. And I was so creeped out by his icy, bright blue eyes, because as we know, Keir Egan had very bright blue eyes in all of the depictions of him. Even when he was depicted as African American, they still gave him these piercing blue eyes. And when the Doctor is wearing the beard, that face looks exactly like Keir Egan to me. It looked precisely like the 8-bit video game version of him we saw, who says, "I love you." And I was like, oh my God, is is this guy some sort of like a reincarnation of Egan? Of course, I don't think he is, but the fact that they make him look so much like Keir is kind of inexplicable and creepy, and so I was intensely creeped out by all of this. It was so bizarre. But yeah, anyway, my name is Michael. This is a fantastic show. I absolutely love every second of it, and I'm completely locked in, and it's sad that I think there are only 3 episodes left this season, and we're gonna have to wait years for another one. But yeah, that's it. Have a very good night, and remember,